What's up, everybody? Happy Friday to you. Today we're talking Packers versus Cardinals, previewing the Packers Week 6 matchup, of course, coming up at noon Lambeau time on Sunday. Packers looking to keep their winning ways going, but so too are the 2-3 Cardinals, who have actually been rather impressive against a pretty tough schedule. So we're going to go through it all. There's also some transactions, some news, some updates for you. So without anything else, let's get right to it. Now, the first topic of conversation, that is going to be about Romeo Doubs. Yeah, as you know, he returned to the practice field. He's been practicing all week. He has no game designation. He's going to play on Sunday. But today, he also spoke to reporters for the first time at his locker. And it wasn't, formal press conference. It was just that typical locker room scrum. And as you're going to hear in the clip that I play in a little bit, there was plenty of other things going on around it. But there were a few little insights that could be gleaned. He talked about how there was some things mentally going on. But at the same time, things are also good now between the organization and he. He also wanted to clarify that his absence was not due to a lack of targets, his role in the offense. Now, we're going to hear from Romeo in just a second, but my contention on this has always been, I don't doubt Bill Huber's reporting. I don't doubt, given the fact that the Packers actually suspended him, that something was said, that there was some angst relayed about a lack of something football related. I also don't doubt, given how we have known Romeo Doubs over the course of 3 years now, that this was an individual who's struggling with something off the field. And frankly, yes, he did do something bad. By all accounts, he abandoned his team. He's got to earn trust back for that, and he talked about that too. But it did seem as though some other things were going on too. So the first thing has to be hoping that Romeo is okay. So I'm going to play just a little bit of this. I don't want to play too much. Obviously, it's not my video. But you can hear too, I really don't want to dive too far into assessing another human being's mental state. But at the same time, I know it's really hard to hear. But just watch the way that he answers a couple of these questions. We'll do like a little bit of about a minute.
Romeo, we haven't had a chance to talk to you since last week. What was the reason that you chose not to come to practice Thursday?
I had some things going on with me. I do not feel comfortable getting too deep into that. Just, you guys hearing it from me, there's some things going on with myself. I did my best communicating, and I'm just thankful that I'm here right now. Everything's going well. So.
Did you address the team when you returned?
One more time.
Did you address the team when you returned to practice?
I did.
Did you address the team when you came back to practice? A multi-second pause before saying I did. This whole thing is just, it's odd. Even him there feels not tremendous, right? I really hope that we're at a point now for both Romeo Doubs and the Packers that they truly are just going to move forward. Later on in that interview, he did talk about how he wishes he would have done some things better, about how he wishes that he can now rebuild the trust with the team, all of that kind of stuff. So everything that is correct being said, sounds like all parties just need to move on and ultimately hope that Romeo Doubs is okay. So let's move on to the next thing that does catch us up on Romeo Doubs. But there was some other actual transaction news as well, and that would be one tight end. The stumbling Luke Musgrave now finds himself on the injured reserve. Yeah, that happened since the last time we talked. They also signed to the 53-man roster John Fitzpatrick, formerly of the Atlanta Falcons practice squad. Matt LaFleur said that he talked to Raheem Morris down in Atlanta, and Atlanta was upset to lose John Fitzpatrick, so LaFleur felt pretty good about that. But of course, Musgrave going to IR. This blow may be feeling easier because of the ascension of Tucker Kraft, but Luke Musgrave does bring some things to the offense that I think we just hadn't seen yet this year. Hopefully, he can come back sooner rather than later. So, all right, as for all of the other injuries, we are now getting into it. It is week 6. Look at that list. It takes up the whole freaking screen, and I'm not even sure it's big enough that you can see it. So, just to cover this, obviously, Luke Musgrave on IR. Devontae Wyatt, he is out officially for this game. Not at all a surprise. There is no status on Jonathan Ford, but he is not yet also on the 53. So if they're going to have him active for Sunday, they're going to have to make some kind of roster move. So just keep that in mind as you see Jonathan Ford. No designation, not a guarantee he's actually going to play. Then they've got a few questionables. Jaire Alexander, questionable. Now, he was asked at his locker today, and he said he's got a pretty good chance of playing. Then you got Jordan Morgan, still questionable. He relayed earlier this week, I believe on Wednesday, that he said he was going to be pretty good to go. Then you've got Christian Watson continuing to come back from his ankle injury, certainly hoping the best there. It would be great if he could go. Aaron Mosby, questionable as well. But then one added to the list today, one left tackle, Rasheed Walker, now questionable, popping up with a new injury. No real other details there. One meaningful player that is good to go, I know there was some concern yesterday, Tucker Kraft. He is good to go. That is straight out of the words of Matt LaFleur. As for the Cardinals, they've got a couple. Zay Jones, their suspended wide receiver, he's not yet going to be able to go this week. He's still out. Darius Robinson, their early draft pick, the defensive lineman, he is still out as well, despite some belief that he might be coming back. He's not this week. Then they've got a few questionables. Kelvin Beachum, their offensive tackle, he's questionable. Christian Jones trying to come back from IR, he's questionable. Matt Prater, their kicker, questionable. And then as well as their nickel corner, Garrett Williams, questionable. Then it's worth highlighting they do have a few notable players on IR too. Will Hernandez, their offensive guard, he got moved to IR this week. So expect a slight downgrade on the offensive line with one of their better ones, Will Hernandez, heading to IR. Jonah Williams, their depth tackle, he's on IR, as well as Elijah Jones, a corner that a lot of Packer fans were pining for during the draft time. He's on IR. So let's get to this. Who are the Arizona Cardinals? Well, they're 2-3. They've picked up wins against the 49ers and the Rams, losses against the Bills, the Lions, and the Commanders. They are a wildly explosive and wildly inconsistent team. The schedule that they've played so far is one of the tougher ones in football, and they're hanging in strong there at 2-3. You could argue they're certainly doing more than just surviving it. I mean, the Bills, Lions, Niners, and then to a lesser extent, Rams, and the Commanders, for talking about explosive teams. That's not exactly the easiest 5-game slate, and they've really only been blown out of one of their 3 losses. That would be against the Commanders of all teams. Against the Lions, against the Bills, those were only 1-score games. And then they beat the Niners by a point, and then they blew out the Rams. So as we go through this, it might feel like the Packers are actually better in nearly every realm, or they have the capacity to be. But when the Cardinals are on, they're showing they can hang with anybody. Luckily for the Packers, you can say the exact same thing about them when they're on, and they've proven it over the last 14 months. So let's take a look now at who the Cardinals are exactly. So obviously they got Kyler Murray, former number 1 pick at quarterback, James Conner at running back, then behind him Amari DeMarcado, as well as Trey Benson. Benson, the rookie out of Florida State, who is doing some nice things just in limited action. Wide receivers, you've got the number 4 pick in the draft, Marvin Harrison Jr. He is their leading receiver. Then you got Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch as well. Trebank Bride, the budding young tight end for the Cardinals, he is amongst their receiving leaders as well. Then taking a look at the offensive line, Paris Johnson Jr., left tackle. He was having a great year thus far. Evan Brown, Froholt at center. Cologne is the one being inserted at right guard instead of Will Hernandez. And then, as I mentioned, Kelvin Beachum, questionable for this game. If he's unable to go, you can see it's going to be somebody else that fills in. And look at all the IRs in the depth of the Cardinals. It's a lot between Christian Jones trying to come back, Carter O'Donnell, Jonah Williams, Will Hernandez. So someone along the lines of like Charlie Heck may be stepping in if Beachum can't go. As for their defense, probably the weakness of the team, I'm going to be totally frank, probably here in the front 7. Zaven Collins is a pretty good pass rusher. Dennis Gardick is their most productive pass rusher, actually, to this point. He's also one of the best tacklers on the team. But still, overall, we're going to get to some numbers. Not exactly an overwhelming front seven for the Cardinals. Then you get into their secondary with Sean Murphy, Bunting, Jalen Thompson, Budda Baker, Starling Thomas, as well as Garrett Williams, who, as I mentioned, is questionable for this game. Also worth noting right here, yeah, that's Bo's brother. We talked about wanting him during the pre-draft process. It just didn't work that way for the Packers. But as Matt LaFleur said, what advice does he have for Bo when going against his brother? Kick his ass. Right on, Matt. Right on. So now diving into the rest of what this means for the Cardinals. Where are they at statistically? Well, in terms of defense, in run defense, they're 28th in the NFL, giving up 147.8 yards per game on the ground. Over their last three, it gets even worse than that, 185 yards on the ground per game. That is worst, dead last in the NFL. In terms of pass defense rankings, they're 17th, giving up 212.8 yards per game through the air. In terms of points per game allowed, they're 27th in the NFL, 25.8, and that is elevated. It's pushed up by giving up 42 to the Commanders. Without that game, if you just look over the 4 games other than the Commanders game, they're sitting at 21.75 points per game allowed, which would tie them for 14th. So that one game is skewing things a bit. It brings them up to a league average-ish without it. In terms of red zone rank, 17th in the NFL with 55% of trips resulting in a touchdown. As for where they rank offensively, in terms of running the ball, they are very good, just like Green Bay, 5th in the NFL, 156.4 yards per game on the ground. And that's actually really good considering that they're 13th in running attempts per game. So they're outrunning their attempts. In terms of their passing offense, they're only throwing the ball 181.6 yards per game through the air, 24th in the NFL. But seemingly matches pretty well because they're 26th in the NFL in attempts for passing. Points per game, 24 points per game, 12th in the NFL. Now, is that pushed up by their 40-point game against the Rams? Yes, it is. So they're 12th in the NFL in points per game. In terms of red zone rank, they are 9th in the NFL. They're a very good team when they get into the red zone, converting 64% of their chances into touchdowns. If you're wondering, because I talked about it a lot in the first 3 weeks, about how Green Bay sucked at that, Green Bay is getting better. They've climbed their way up to about 50% in the red zone now. Still in the bottom third of the NFL, but they're getting there. It's progress. Cardinals just way better at it. In terms of turnovers, general stats, turnover margin, they are 9th in the NFL at a positive 0.4 turnovers per game, positive 2 just last week against San Francisco. Penalties, this is a stark contrast between the Packers and the Cardinals. Packers, of course, amongst the worst in the league in terms of penalties. The Cardinals, they are the best team in the NFL in terms of penalties. 3.8 penalties per game called against the Cardinals. That is less than half of Green Bay's, and it is pretty substantially the best in the NFL. And then in terms of sacks given up and sacks gotten per game, 2.2, an exact match, which tells you two things. As we highlight offense and defense, they don't give up a lot of sacks. They also don't get a lot of sacks. 2.2 is not high in either one of those regards. So, if you're the Green Bay Packers, how do you defend this Cardinal offense? First off, James Conner, he's having another great year. He's currently 7th in the NFL in total rushing yards, tied for 6th in the NFL in missed tackles forced. And it's not just these little barreling runs that Conner has done before. He actually ranked 2nd in the NFL with 12 runs going over 10 yards. The only one higher than him is Jeff Mason of the San Francisco 49ers. But really, in spite of the strong year that Conner is having, it really all comes down to Kyler. Marvin Harrison Jr., fantastic rookie receiver. We're really hoping Jaire could play so Jaire could go against Marvin Harrison Jr. And they've got Trey McBride. They've got capable receivers. But man, Kyler is having a tremendous season both through the air and on the ground. Keep in mind, in addition to all the passing stats that I'm going to rattle off, he's also 3rd amongst all quarterbacks in total rushing yards, behind only Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels. Plus, per ESPN speed tracking, Kyler Murray, he had a 50-yard touchdown run against the 49ers last week. On that run, he ran for over 21 miles an hour. That was the top speed. That is the highest top speed on any quarterback run in the last 8 seasons. It's not that he's agile. He fast. And that does create problems for defenses, obviously. But then on the throwing side of things, like I said, he's doing well. He is first in the NFL with 11 big-time throws. And then to mirror that, he's only got 4 turnover-worthy plays. He's also 5th in the NFL with a really strong average depth of target, or ADOT, sitting at 8.9. The saving grace on that ADOT, though, is that the farther he goes down the field, I know it's logical, but still for Kyler, it's even a little bit more than the logic dictates. The farther he goes down the field, that's where the weaker numbers come into play. It's still strong, but generally weaker. It's still QB rating of over 90, certainly, but on attempts over 20 yards, he's only 7 of 20. And half of those turnover-worthy plays have come on throws over 20 yards. And in case you're wondering, yeah, that's Xavier McKinney's music with how he's playing lately. So, how do you beat a guy who's doing it all? Because realistically, James Conner is a fantastic running back, no doubt about it. Is he the game record that you're going to build the whole game plan around? Nah, probably not. What about Trey McBride? What about Marvin Harrison Jr.? No, probably not at this stage. It really is all Kyler. That's how do you beat him? Realistically, you just hope to contain him, and part of that is literally containing him in the pocket. Per Zach Cruz, who put out some fantastic stats this week on the Twitter, he put out Kyler Murray splits in 2024 when the ball is out in under 2.5 seconds. Now, of course, you would think that would be pocket passes, right? 5.4 yards per attempt, 81.4 passer rating on 78 dropbacks. But when the ball is held over 2.5 seconds, he moves it up to 9.1 yards per attempt and a 122.1 passer rating. Dangerous off-schedule QB. It's worth noting, too, that on those 20 attempts that go farther than 20 yards downfield, his average time to throw is darn near 4 seconds. To Zach Cruz's point, right there on the last line, dangerous off-schedule QB. Murray is not a rhythm quarterback like we've been talking about with Jordan Love. He's an off-schedule game breaker who thrives in chaos. The best thing that you could do against someone like that is force him to get the ball out quick and maintain lane integrity to truly box him in. I would not expect. I do think the Packers will send blitzes. I do see that coming. But I don't think this is going to be a game where we're going to talk after the game is done about like, oh, the pass rush is fixed. Rashawn Gary had 4 sacks and Preston Smith had 2. And like, nah, these stats aren't coming this game. This is going to be a lot closer to week 1 and week 2 where they are told to maintain their lanes. And if there is going to be pass rush production, it's going to be on blitzes and it's going to be people like Edgerrin Cooper. Speaking of Edgerrin Cooper, I do not mind it one bit if he is assigned a QB spy role for this game. I could absolutely get with that. Now, as for the Cardinals defense, they are a much stronger offensive team than they are defensive team, at least per the numbers. Now, I say that bearing in mind that they do have a positive turnover differential, like I talked about, positive 0.4 per game. But still, while scanning over the entirety of the numbers, the list of names, like I said, the great weakness here is probably in the Cardinals' front 7. See, again, as Zach Cruz said, I told you, he had a great week on Twitter. Cardinals are creating pressure on only 25.3% of opponent dropbacks this season per Next Gen Stats, second worst in the NFL. PFF has them as the 4th worst pass rushing team. Just not many scary rushers on that front. So, here's the thing, and maybe there's some correlation here too, because that's just the pass rush. That's just the front, right? And we talked about how they are, over the last 3 games, the worst team in the NFL at run defense in terms of yards per game. They're also not the best tackling team either. There are 11 individuals who have at least 9 tackles on the season for the Cardinals. 7 of them have a missed tackle rate north of 10%. And again, maybe with the tackles, maybe with the lack of pass rush, there's some correlation here. Of the Cardinals' 5 starters in the secondary, only 1 has a QB rating allowed when targeted under 100. 4 of the 5 are over 100. And that's true for both of their boundary corners and both of their safeties. The only one that's not true is the guy who's questionable in the secondary, their nickel, Garrett Williams. And if Garrett Williams isn't able to go, that means realistically, at least what they've done thus far, their dime back is the guy who happens to have the highest QB rating when targeted on the entire team. So we've talked a lot, realistically, I do think the Packers should be able to do. Now, the Cardinals are opportunistic. Look at that turnover margin. But on the whole, the Packers should be able to do what they want in this game offensively. We've been talking for weeks now about how the Packers are so close. Like it's just like last year, just a little bit more accurate. Don't have the highest drop rate in football. That'll help too. Maybe just a little bit more protection. Jordan, calm down, etc. All the things that we've been saying for weeks because they're just so close. This is the kind of defense, this is the kind of game, being back home especially, that all these things could just start to click. Dobbs is back. Watson might be back. You're really only missing one component of your aerial attack, and it's in the form of Luke Musgrave, who's been incredibly quiet throughout the first 5 weeks of the season. So this could very well be a game that the Packers are able to get back on track. And I really won't be shocked if that's the case. On the whole, zooming out, looking at this whole game, now there is some weather being talked about. Like right now, it looks to be like mid-50s for kickoff, some of Green Bay in the rain zone, other parts not. So we'll see. But if it is a nice day, if it's a nice crisp fall day in the mecca of Lambeau Field, then this could just disintegrate into a shootout real fast. These are two very explosive offenses. Keep in mind the Green Bay Packers lead the NFL in explosive plays. And they just happen to be going against a Cardinal team that is also really explosive. So this could be a shootout real quick. So I'm going to go with a game prediction of 37 Green Bay, 34 Arizona. Yes, another Packer win. This should be a very fun cardiac pack type game, 37-34. If it happens to be just a slop, if it's rain, if it's cloudy, I'll lop off 20 off of each of them. I still like Green Bay in that game, though. So that's it. There you have it. Join us on Sunday for the watch party. Me and Claudia, we will be here. She'll be joining us for half two, but I'll be here the whole time, hanging out, talking Packers, Cardinals, watching the game with you folks. Thanks so much for joining me here on this Friday night or this weekend. Do hope you are having a great one. And as always, go Pack, go.